to anybody so everybody can take notes, and we have that for you guys at the end. Additionally, we will be taking live questions at the end. The way we're going to be doing those will be by utilizing the Zoom raise hand function. So in order to access your little hand, you can click on participants and click on your name, and it should give you the option to either for more or to raise hand. And you can find that feature there. If you are feeling too shy, don't be afraid. You can also submit your question via the chat, and myself and my colleagues will make sure that your question gets asked. And also, I think with that, that's all I have. And with that, we're going to go ahead and start off with a brief message from Congressman Gil Cisneros. We're going to try that again. One moment. Oh, 1 second. Let's go ahead and try that again.
Hello, everyone. I'm Congressman Gil Cisneros. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you this afternoon, but you're in very capable hands with my team. I'm excited to launch our inaugural grant webinars for this year. Since my first day in Congress, I've made it a commitment to make government resources easier to access and bring federal funding back to our district. These webinars are intended to bridge the gap of accessibility between the local organizations looking for federal funding opportunities and the federal agencies themselves. Now more than ever, our community needs these resources. In the past couple of months, I brought back over $200 million in coronavirus relief for the 39th district. We want to make sure that you can all access the available federal funding that could help your organization, our workers, families, small businesses, and community. Today's webinar will focus on the available funding opportunities within the U.S. Department of Transportation and best practices for applying for these grants. We welcome today's special guest, Ann Renke, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Intergovernmental Affairs at the Department of Transportation. Sean Poole, Director of Intergovernmental Affairs at Department of Transportation. Roger Bonner, Director of Outreach for the Build America Bureau. Thank you all for being with us today. I want to encourage everyone to ask questions, and as always, reach out to my office if you need any assistance. Continue to stay safe, follow the CDC guidelines, practice social distancing, wear a mask, and practice safe hygiene. I'll talk to you all later. Take care and bye.
And with that, I would like to present Sean Poole from the U.S. Department of Transportation. Sean?
There we go, found the mute button. Hello everyone, my name is Sean Poole. I'm the Director of Intergovernmental Affairs at the U.S. Department of Transportation for the Secretary. There we go. Can you see my presentation there?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, welcome. Today is a grants overview and loans overview of the different programs that we have to offer at the Department of Transportation. We know that the federal bureaucracy is large, and so we're here to be a resource for you to make sure that you can access funding so that we can all invest together and build a stronger partnership for investing in our nation's crumbling infrastructure. So just a quick overview of what we're going to go through. One, I'll just touch base real quick about DOT, what the Secretary's priorities are and how the different modes of transportation function within the department. We'll do a brief overview of several of our most popular grant programs at the department. And then I'll turn it over to Roger to do an overview on some of our very appealing loan programs that a lot of folks didn't know that were out there. Then we'll open it up at the end for any questions. I know we got about 10 or 12 folks that are joining us today. So you can either save your questions for the end, or Erica, if you see any folks raise their hand in the middle, feel free to stop and ask questions. So first, want to start off with the Secretary's priorities. The first priority for the Department of Transportation is always safety. What we want to do is keep the traveling American safe. We say it's not transportation if it's not safe. The second priority is innovation. We want to engage with emerging technologies while not inhibiting progress forward with these technologies, but we want to be able to implement them safe within the transportation system. Whenever we talk about innovation, everybody always thinks about the cool new gadgets out there, whether it be boring a tunnel and having a super fast train that goes through there, or flying cars or drones or things like that. But we take a really holistic approach at the department when looking at innovation. We look at it from innovative financing, such as what Roger will talk about, as well as innovation from a regulatory standpoint, to where we can streamline regulations to empower states and localities to invest in their needs. Third is maintaining and investing in our nation's infrastructure. The infrastructure consistently has been rated poorly across the country, and so we're doing everything that we can in this administration to make sure that we get money out the door as quickly as possible to invest in our nation's infrastructure. So with that, we'll move on to the different operating modes at the department. The department is broken up into about 13 different modes. These are the top ones here. The FAA is the Federal Aviation Administration. The next one going down that same column is the Federal Highways Administration. The next one is the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, the Federal Railroad Administration, the Federal Transit Administration, the Maritime Administration, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. The OIG is our internal mode here. OST is the Office of the Secretary. PHMSA is looking at pipelines and hazardous materials. And SLSDC is way up there in the northern portion for the St. Lawrence Seaway. So we really cover a vast mode or multimodal transportation at the department. One thing, whenever everyone comes to us, they say, well, how can we partner with the department? And one of the major ways that you're able to partner with us is through the different types of funding opportunities. With the day of earmarks out the door, the discretionary grants are a way that we are able to partner with localities directly to invest in our nation's infrastructure. We also offer a good chunk of our funding comes from formula funding that's set out by Congress that flows directly to the states or to localities based on the formula. But we can get into that in just a little bit later. The grants are broken up between the Office of the Secretary, and then that's where a lot of the major grants are held, and then also broken up into each different mode. So the Federal Transit Administration offers several different types of transit-related grants or planning grants, as well as the Federal Railroad offers for rail investments, and so on and so forth. And so we're going to talk on a couple of those different items today. The other type of opportunities are loans. Now, they're not grants. You do have to pay them back, but there are some very appealing loan opportunities that we have to offer that I'll let Roger jump into to be able to fund all sorts of multimodal transportation projects. So we'll dive right into some of our grant programs. One thing that I do want to talk about before we get into the actual funding opportunities is some of the initiatives that the administration has undertaken to prioritize different types of fundings whenever you do look at the discretionary grants. The first one is the opportunity zones. This is an initiative that focuses on revitalizing the economically distressed communities by providing basic infrastructure and financial tools to attract private investment. Opportunity zones are a powerful vehicle for bringing economic growth, job creation to American communities that need it the most. One thing that I found that was very interesting whenever we began this initiative based on the president's executive order was that DOT has awarded more than $1.25 billion in discretionary funding directly to opportunity zones in the last 2 years alone. DOT has also included opportunity zones as a priority in over 40 notice of funding opportunities at the department. The next initiative is our routes initiative. I know that the congressman's district is very diverse, but one thing that's very unique about the routes initiative is that this initiative allows us to partner with states and localities to help navigate the department. The Routes Initiative recently announced the applicant toolkit, which was prioritized towards rural communities to help folks that didn't have the resources as some large major cities to navigate the department. But the great thing about how we were able to structure it was whenever you help rural America, it helps all of America. And so whenever we developed this toolkit, we had the same idea in mind. And Erica, I'll share with you so that you can distribute to the group a link to the applicant toolkit that was recently released. And it will help give a breakdown of every single mode and every single discretionary funding opportunity that the department has to offer, with links directly to the different websites that the department has for those particular programs. So I think that's a very useful tool that this initiative was able to spur. So let's dive into the grant programs themselves. The first one or first two that we're going to look at falls under the Office of the Secretary. And these are our two probably most popular grant programs at the department. The first one is the Build Discretionary Grant. That's better utilizing investments to leverage development. This discretionary grant is used for both planning and capital grants to invest in surface transportation infrastructure projects that have regional and national impacts. The Build Grant Program can support projects from roads to bridges to transit to rail, and can be multimodal as well. We're still in the midst of the evaluation for this round of Build. It is an annually appropriated program, so we will have to wait and see until next year for what the next round is. But for this round, we anticipate meeting the statutory deadlines that were set out by Congress to make our award announcements for this fiscal year by September 15th, which is just right around the corner. The next grant program in the Office of the Secretary is the Info Grant Program. The Info Grant Program has a large focus on freight infrastructure improvements, mainly for major highways, bridges, ports, rail, to help better connect communities across the country. And I know that your district knows this oh too well with some major ports that are in your, right outside of your region, and the amount of freight traffic that does travel through as a gateway to the rest of the country. And so the Info Grant Program is broken up into two different pots. It is focused primarily for larger projects. And what we categorize large projects under this program is a project that's $100 million or more. So 90% of the total funding set aside for infra for that year goes towards large projects. And on average, we're roughly about 10 times oversubscribed for both infra and build. But however, with the infra projects, the small projects that are less than $100 million are actually even more competitive on average, about 20 to 1. So again, these are two extremely competitive grant programs. But the great thing about it, and not just with these two, but with all of our programs at the department, is that if you are unsuccessful, then we can offer technical debriefs whenever we get, if you're not awarded, then you can come back to us and we'll have a technical evaluator sit with you and go line by line through your application, tell you how you can improve for next year. And we've seen this to be a very valuable tool to communities across the country to make sure that they're putting their best foot forward for next time. So we'll move on to some of our other grants. The Federal Railroad Administration, I thought that this would be appealing to several of the folks that are on the line here, because your district has actually been very successful in the CRISI program. In FY18, the district actually received $30 million worth of grants out of this program, and in FY19 received $10.75 million. So you've got a great track record in that area for delivering on these types of projects, and I know that there's a great need. The CRISI program, or the Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements Program, is a program that provides funding for projects that addresses the rail congestion challenges, improve highway rail grade crossings, upgrade the short line railroad infrastructure, improve intercity passenger rail capital assets, and deploy railroad safety technology. Both freight and passenger rail infrastructure projects are eligible, and so this has been a very popular program. We actually have not announced the FY20 awards yet, but do anticipate to hopefully get them out in the month of September, but we'll definitely meet the October 15th deadline to make those announcements if anybody has any pending grants. The next one for the Federal Railroad Administration is the State of Good Repair Grant. This program funds capital projects within the U.S. to repair, replace, rehabilitate qualified railroad assets and reduce the state of good repair backlog and improve the intercity passenger rail performance. The program grants are intended to benefit the publicly or Amtrak owned or controlled passenger rail infrastructure equipment and facilities in both rural and urban communities. So those are two popular ones for railroad. I think the other grants that most people would be interested in come from the Federal Transit Administration. This is a big focus and has been continuously increased in funding from the Hill over the last couple of years, and we've seen these programs to be very popular as well. The first one is the Bus and Bus Facility Competitive Grant Program. This provides funding to state and local government authorities to replace, rehabilitate, or purchase buses and related equipment to rehabilitate, purchase, construct, or lease bus-related facilities. So this is a great one for if you're trying to replace a bus, replace a fleet, or any of the housing facilities related to the buses, as well as any of the transit stops as well. We've seen this actually be coupled with some of our other grant programs at the department to try to piece those puzzles together. The next one is the Low or No Emissions Grant Program. This program provides funding to state and local government authorities for the purchase or lease of zero emission and low emission transit buses, as well as acquisition, construction, and leasing of required supporting facilities. So the FY20, there was $130 million available for that one, and we've already made the announcements there. And then the Bus and Bus Facility grants that I mentioned earlier, there was 510 million that was available during the 2020 that we announced. So moving on to the federal highways program, just wanted to take a minute to explain to everybody the federal highways. You know, you think roads, and there should be a bunch of discretionary grant programs that cover all the different highways and roads across the country. While there are some of the major ones like build and infra, like I talked about, that come out of the office of the secretary, actually over 90% of the funding that comes to federal highways actually goes through the formula and goes directly to the states for them to distribute as they see fit. So the FAST Act actually authorized $305 billion over the fiscal years 2016 through 2020 for highway and highway improvement and safety projects. Let me see here. So for the formula for this past year, the state of California got just over $4 billion through the formula, actually. And that goes to the State Department of Transportation and then flows down to the different localities. And some of the times they use their own discretionary grant programs with those dollars within the state. Or sometimes it just goes directly to various cities, but that all happens at the state level and not at the federal level. With that being said, one thing that we always encourage you to do is to reach out to either your division or region office. Federal Highways has a division office in every single state. It's always very important to build these relationships with the division office, because whenever you're looking to invest in transportation projects, or when you apply to one of these discretionary grant programs, the first thing that we do, say you apply for a build grant to repair a road. Well, we pick up the phone and we call Federal Highways division office in California there in Sacramento and say, hey, have you heard of this project? Is there anything that we need to be aware of? So it's always good to have that relationship there with them. I've provided the contact information below, and feel free to reach out to them, or if you need a direct contact, I'm happy to connect anybody via email. There are division offices for the Federal Railroad, for the maritime industry, for the Transit Administration, and always encourage you to figure out where your region is. And all of those are actually defined in the routes toolkit that I mentioned earlier, that I'll pass along to Erica to pass out to everybody. So that's just sort of the snapshot of some of our major grant programs at the department. I know it's very high level, but didn't want to talk at you for too long. Happy to open it up as a conversation whenever we get done. But with that being said, I'll turn it over to Roger to touch on the loan programs that we have to offer.
Great, thanks, Sean. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Roger Bonner. I head up Outreach and Project Development within the Build America Bureau. And I'll talk a little bit more about who we are and what we do in a moment. You know, you heard from Sean that a lot of the grant programs are oversubscribed, sometimes 10 to 1, sometimes 20 to 1. People sometimes wonder, why would I look for a loan if I could get a grant? But the biggest difference is that our loan programs are not oversubscribed. We have about $55 billion in capacity to do future loans. And because it's not competitive, because we don't have to, pick a subset of projects to advance, if the borrower is an eligible borrower, if the project is an eligible project, and there's sufficient credit that our underwriters can underwrite a loan, you can get a loan. So I think the trade-off here is that if you have a project that you feel really has to get done, and maybe it didn't get a grant, not that it's not a good project, but that they just have to pick 1 in 10 or 1 in 20, then pursuing a loan with us might be an opportunity to either complement a grant, because the grants rarely ever cover the entire cost of a project, or maybe to let that project advance, even though you didn't get a grant. So I think it's something that would be a good tool to have in your toolkit. And just to give you a little idea, we can loan all kinds of amounts of money, but just as an example, if we lent $10 million to a borrower, we can go up to 35 years. And at today's interest rates, the payments would be about $360,000 a year. So an amount of money that seems like it would be hard to get your arms around might actually be something manageable to a borrower. And again, you can keep the project moving forward. Like I said, I'll talk a little bit about the Bureau, but then I want to do sort of like Sean did. I want to just touch very briefly on each of our key products and services. And then we can either join a discussion period, drill into those that you find the most interesting, or we can always have a conversation after this presentation. So a little about us. The Bureau was formed about 4 years ago. As a matter of fact, next month, I think, is our anniversary. And what it did was we took the loan programs out of a couple of the places that Sean talked about in the DOT organization. We have the TIFIA loan program that was in Federal Highway Administration, the RIF loan program, which was in Federal Railroad Administration, and then a private activity bonding program that was actually in the Secretary's office. And we brought all of the financial mechanisms into one place so that we can function more like a bank, because those other agencies are more safety oriented, and borrowers would have to go to a number of places to get access to those other financing tools. So in short, we provide financing, we provide technical assistance and education, and we offer all of those services in one place. And Sean mentioned the toolkit under routes. We work to be a single point of contact, a one-stop shop, because we recognize that looking into a large organization in Washington, D.C. from afar, one of your biggest challenges is trying to find out what the programs are, who do I talk to, and all of that. So in the Bureau, we provide a single point of contact for each and every project. And we get the focus from the highest level in the department because we are in the office of the Secretary. And that way we can help guide projects through every stage of the process. There's really three things that we're focused on. The first is increasing access to our credit programs. We're expanding the number and the types of projects that are eligible and working to remove barriers and increasing the streamlining of the process so it's a little easier to manage. We also encourage project sponsors to utilize our technical assistance on innovative financing, permitting, project delivery, and other issues to improve their projects and speed them along. And we do that through direct consultations and by laying out best practices that can be utilized for both public and private sponsors. So the first program I want to talk about is TIFIA. Sorry for all the acronyms, but we wouldn't be the federal government if we didn't have a fistful of them. So that's Transportation, Infrastructure, Finance, and Innovation Act. In general, it's loans for surface transportation projects, and that can be roads, bridges, tunnels, transit systems, transit vehicles, stations, commercial seaports. As a matter of fact, the ports down in Southern California have received a number of loans from us. Also intermodal freight facilities, and even things like bike paths. That is not a typo in that blue circle. As of about a week ago, the interest rate, which was a fixed interest rate, was 1.38%. It's tied to the Treasury rate. So we can give fixed rate loans for a very long period. Not only can we go up to 35 years, but sometimes we can actually defer the payments for 5 years after completion of the project's construction. That can be really helpful if the project itself needs time to generate revenues that will ultimately repay the loan. The other thing that's important is that there's no prepayment penalty, which is very different from one of the other options in transportation, which is bonding. But if you issue bonds, there is a prepayment penalty, and you also pay interest on the whole amount of the bonds the day they're drawn. For us, as you draw the money, and it may be over several years during construction, you're only paying interest on the amount of money that you've drawn. So that can be a significant savings. Now with TIFIA, we typically finance up to 33% of the eligible project costs. In a minute, I'm going to talk about an exception to that. And the other thing is that we can highly customize the amortization schedule to meet the borrower's needs. So any of us that has a mortgage, the payment is the same from day one all the way through. But what we can do is tweak the principal and interest based on the cycle of revenues that will repay the loan. Again, that can be very helpful if it's a private sector, generating revenues to pay for the project. The next one I want to talk about, I call it a program within a program. So this is still the TIFIA loan program, but this is what we call the Rural Projects Initiative, and the Congressman's district does have some rural areas that would be eligible for this. It's the same eligibility for projects. So the same types of projects that I mentioned for TIFIA would be eligible for this. What I didn't mention in TIFIA, and this is the case with all our loan programs, we can lend to a pretty wide variety of entities. State DOTs, municipalities, port authorities, private partners. So if you're doing a public-private partnership, we can actually lend to the private partner, and any number of other political subdivisions and other entities. But it's important to remember also private sector. So for rural projects, and the definition is outside a census-defined urbanized area of greater than 150,000 people. And I have to mention that some of our different grant programs have a different definition of rural. We are painfully aware of that, but unfortunately, each of those is legislated separately by Congress, so we can't just unilaterally harmonize those. So we apologize for the confusion that causes. But if the project cost is between $10 and $100 million, TIFIA can finance up to 49% of the eligible costs, where otherwise it would only be 33%. And that's really attractive to a lot of project sponsors, because at 33%, you kind of have to go out and get another loan or you issue bonds or something else. But when you get to that 49%, you're getting close to where if you've got some cash on hand, you can actually just get a TIFIA loan and advance the project. The interest rate gets cut in half. So that is, I have to always add the zero because the numbers are kind of mind-boggling, but it's under 0.7% interest. And for projects that are under $75 million, you can also pay the fees that the applicant would otherwise have to pay for a TIFIA loan. This is as you might guess, a very popular program, and we just started it about a year ago. We're going to close our very first RPI loan in next week. We'll have 2 more loans closed by the end of the calendar year. And the first 2 of those are California projects. And interestingly, those first 2 are also transit projects. So rural transit agencies are finding a lot of value in that. So while TIFIA is in the past done more highways than transit, this program is seeming to be, and both are eligible, but transit are the first ones out the gate. I want to mention state infrastructure banks because California does have a state infrastructure bank, and they can actually set up a rural projects fund, and then we can lend them, similar to the Rural Projects Initiative, we can lend them a lump sum of money at half of the treasury rate, and if that lump sum of money is under $75 million, we can also waive the fees for the loan. And then the thing that changes is the infrastructure bank then can on-lend the money in much smaller tranches. So they could, if they wanted to, they could do $500,000 loans and they can cover 80% of project costs, where even under the Rural Projects Initiative, we can only do 49. So we see this as an opportunity in some areas to do some really good local, small, rural lending. And we got interest from a number of states in that program. The next thing I want to talk about, and we're going to shift gears from surface transportation to RIF. So RIF is Railroad Rehabilitation and Improvement Financing. And the way I describe this is it's all things rail, whether it's freight rail, passenger rail, stations, the track, the rolling stock, maintenance facilities, almost any infrastructure that has to do with rail is generally eligible. It's very similar to TIFIA. You see it's got the same interest rate. And we can also go out for the same duration, 35 and more years. There are 2 key differences. One is that we can finance up to 100% of the eligible project costs, or you saw with TIFIA, it's either 33 or 49. But on the other hand, the way we do it with TIFIA is we have appropriated money. So if you're bringing us a riskier loan that a bank would never give you the interest rate that we're offering on, we have what's called a credit subsidy. So we sort of subsidize that to buy down your interest rate. We subsidize the risk of the borrower. However, with RIF, we don't have that. So the borrower pays that risk, which is called a credit risk premium. And in some cases, if it's a risky loan, that can be prohibitive. But we've got many cases where there is virtually zero. As a matter of fact, we just closed a $900 million RIF loan, and it was a zero credit risk premium. And there are other ways you can minimize that credit risk premium or bring it down, including adding collateral, because that reduces the risk to the lender. With TIFIA, I should mention that the smallest project size for TIFIA is $10 million, and there is no upper end. For RIF, the smallest is anything. The smallest one we've ever done, I think, was $55,000. And there's no upper limit as well. So the biggest one we've done for RIF was, I think, $2.5 billion. So none too small, none too large. And then RIF Express is another program within a program. So again, it's very much like the RIF loan program. And I'll mention that it had an open period. So this was one that it was you could only apply for a certain time frame. And that closed on the 15th of August. But we anticipate to reopen that in the very near future and expand eligibility. So RIF Express, like I said, it's based on the RIF program. And initially, RIF Express was limited to the small freight railroads, so short line and regional freight railroads. That may get expanded in the next one to make more borrowers eligible. And then the project cost was capped at $50 million, and it had to be a pretty straightforward project, basically state of good repair, modernizing things and stuff like that. But in the next open period, we will probably expand the dollar value of the projects and the scope of project types. And then the benefits to the borrower are that we're going to speed up the processing of the loan. We have some money to pay that credit risk premium so that the borrower doesn't have to. In the initial open period, it was 5% of up to 5% of the loan amount. And stay tuned, that number may very well go up. And then we can also help borrowers with the fees to get a loan up to $100,000 per project. So even though this closed, it's actually August 15th that it closed, literally within weeks or a month, that'll probably reopen and could be of great interest to folks in your district. The last thing I want to talk about is really a framework for speeding up and reducing costs of projects that are really ready to go. And we're calling it Build It Now. And what we've seen is a lot of projects are not funded now, but they're ready to build. But they're out in 5 years out in the state plan, the money is committed to build it. So you wait the 5 years, costs escalate for the whole time, and then you build the project and you've lost a lot of time. So I'll just use one example here. And while the example I use is an RPI, Rural Projects Initiative model, the interest rates and other things with regular TIFIA would still represent significant savings. So let's say you have a $100 million project. You only have $50 million in hand, but 5 years out, you're going to budget $70 million to do the second half of the project. So very typically, transportation sponsors will construct the first phase of the project, and then 5 years later, under a separate contract, they'll build the second phase, and 2 years after that, the project's actually complete and the facility's in service. But that 5 years out, they had to budget $70 million for what would cost $50 this year, because you've got construction price escalation, and right now it's over 4% per year. And you're going to have 2 mobilizations of contractors and 2 demobilizations of contractors because it's 2 separate contracts. And all those add costs, as well as all the other soft costs for for doing the contracting process itself. So your total cost is $120 million, and it took you 7 years to get there. On another alternative, which is the build it now, if you can go to the next slide, Sean. This would be with a TIFIA loan. So you still have your first $50 million. It's on day one, but you get a TIFIA loan for $49 million. And by the way, that could be your developer coming to borrow from us. And what they do is they come to us and they say, look, we've got the money in year 5. It's committed by the state or the jurisdiction. And the Bureau can lend to that. We will underwrite to that. So now you've got the whole $100 million on day one. You do a single contract, you build the entire project. So by the end of year 2, it's delivered. By the 5th year, when that money is available from the transportation plan, the loan gets repaid, and the total cost is just over $100 million. And on the next slide, you can see what the benefits are. First off, you save about 20, and that number is actually a little high because the interest right now is so low that the total cost is under $101 million. And you deliver the project 5 years sooner. So for 5 years, the facility's been providing the benefits that you've been seeking. So we've been socializing this. We've got quite a number of project sponsors very interested in it, including in jurisdictions that don't have the authority legally to borrow money because it's actually the developer that could do the borrowing. So we're looking, this is just one of a number of tools we have to find innovative ways to solve a problem instead of just waiting years and years to get something built. So I think I'll leave it at that. I will say that either join the discussion or afterwards. It is really easy to work with us. There's no application or anything to get started. Just give us a call or send us an email. Tell us about your projects or anything that you see that might be a good fit, and we can have that conversation and work together on the project. So thank you very much for your time and attention, and I'll yield the floor to Sean.
Unmute, there we go. Thanks, Roger, really appreciate it. And I am happy to say that Ann was able to join us. So I'm gonna turn it over for concluding remarks from Ann Rinke, who's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Congressional Affairs in the Office of the Secretary. And as soon as she gives the concluding remarks, then we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Sean and Roger and Erica. I apologize that I had to be late for this. I hope you all have had a good discussion so far. I'm just going to wrap us up really and then open up for questions. So obviously, you know, we're in the last few months of an election year of the first term of the Trump administration. So we are wrapping up things as feverishly as we possibly can. We still have a number of things that we have to do. As Sean mentioned, we have build grants we have to award. We have the railroad grants, the CRISI program left to award. We have port infrastructure development grants left to award. Roger's shop is very busy granting loans to a variety of entities and private activity bonds, et cetera. There is a lot of work that we're doing on the grant front, in addition to safety regulation at FAA and FRA as they put together, you know, positive train control, which is supposed to be required on all trains by the end of this year. So any number of activities. I noticed that some of the questions submitted talked about funding levels for next year. And so one of the things that also needs to get done on the congressional level is appropriations for FY 2021. So the House passed a bill, the Senate has not yet. So we don't know, for example, what funding build we'll get next year. The House had said $1 billion, maybe that will happen. We just don't know yet. So we're working on that. And then the other thing that we have to work through on a congressional level with our assistance is the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill that provides all the funding for the federal highway programs, for the federal transit programs, and Amtrak, et cetera. That expires September 30th. And so Congress has to take action on that. And there are two different bills. The House and the Senate have two different bills. It's unclear that, and Erica probably could speak to this too, it's unclear that they're going to marry their efforts and have a successful 5-year bill by the end of the year. it's possible, but more likely that we'll probably have to have some kind of extension for those programs of some limited duration. Could be a year, could be less than that. So we are always tasked with providing technical assistance for the members of Congress as they put together their final packages, their legislative packages, since we have the expertise to let everyone know how it jives with existing law. So that's it. We've got a really busy, 4 months left of the year. I think that should really cover it. We appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. I know that COVID has prevented all of us from getting together. Typically, we would fly out to see you, or you would fly out to see us. So, but this is the next best alternative, and so we're very glad to do it. With that, I'll turn it over to Erica for questions.
So thank you so much, Sean and Roger. We really appreciate your time and putting this together for us to learn about the federal funding opportunities that the DOT has for us. With that being said, if we're now at the point where we'd like to take live questions from our participants on the webinar. If you have a question, you should be able to use the raise hand feature that Zoom has in order to allow us to suggest that you have a question, and we'll go ahead and unmute you that way so you can ask your question live. You should be able to just click on participants, select the more option, and then it should give you the raise hand option from there. And yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand now. While we wait for people to come up with their questions, I'm going to go ahead and pull from the pre-submitted questions that we received during the registration process. And so one question that we did receive is, where can we find the available funding opportunities? Is this available on grants.gov, or what would be the best platform?
Yeah, absolutely. Grants.gov is a great place. That's where we post all of our notice of funding opportunities. However, it can be a little tricky to navigate. So what I will say that we also do is we put out press releases anytime that we issue our notice of funding opportunities. Within the applicable modes. So if you're looking for a transit grant, you can always go on the U.S. Department of Transportation FTA's website, and they list all of their notice of funding opportunities there, when they open, when they closed. You can also look at previous rounds as well, so you can see what changes and what stays the same. A lot of the different notice of funding opportunities do stay the same because it's quite a bit of statutory requirements that we have to adhere to. So you're able to see what the previous years look like and plan for the future. But that'd be a great tool to do. Also, as I mentioned, the Routes Applicant Toolkit as well does have links to each of the different programs' websites, and the notice of funding opportunities are posted there as well.
Thank you, Sean. I don't see any hands raised at the moment. Feel free to also submit your questions via the chat feature as well. We're happy to take your question that way. Pulling again from the pre-submitted questions. Somebody asked, how can we be notified of grant opportunities? Do we submit, or who do we submit our projects to? Is there a list of available grants? Was that also posted in the same, I guess the same way that you just mentioned, Sean, or is that any different?
Yeah, so that would be the same way. The other thing too is we're happy to partner with all localities across the country. If you have a project that you're interested in, feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to figure out, have a discussion with you about what your needs are for the project, and can kind of help you navigate the department and figure out what's available for this year or what could be available for the future, to try to plan. And then Roger, I know you work similarly to our approach, but I'll let you speak about your working relationships as well.
Well, thanks. And yeah, I work hand in glove with Sean and Ann. So if you reach out to any one of us, the others are sort of automatically in the loop. So that kind of simplifies things. And then for us, if the project sponsor does express an interest in in our programs, wanting to learn a little bit more, what I do is I assign one of the people on my team. We call them project development leads. And from the time that project is a twinkle in your eye, I am happy to assign one of my team members to you and your project, and then they can serve as that one-stop shop, that single point of contact, where people can, we can bring other folks within the Department of Transportation, into the conversation as needed. So let's say you have a project with an environmental question, or there's a Buy America issue or some permitting question. We have experts on staff, and we just convene those folks on a conference call with you and sort through it. And we'll do that from the day we have our first conversation right up until you've got your loan and the project is built.
Thank you, Roger and Sean. The next question we have here is somebody, one of our participants asked, seeking future funding for ATP and road widening projects, funding for undergoing of utility lines. Is there any funding for that you guys know what funding program would that fall into?
Yeah, so some of our larger discretionary grants that I mentioned, like build and infra, could potentially be eligible for some of those. A lot of what's eligible is the formula dollars that flow directly to the states from Federal Highways Administration to your state DOTs, and they distribute as applicable. Unfortunately, the laying of utility lines or utility pipes is not an eligible cost at the Department of Transportation under the grant programs. However, some of our counterparts, say at DOE, those you could find additional grants there that do cover those costs. However, if you are replacing a road, then we can cover the cost of digging up the road. And then you would have to lay your utilities, and then we can pay for you to repave it and pile everything back on top. So, there are some workarounds to it, but with that being said, that's where we're at on the grant side. Roger, I don't know if there's any different statutory requirements on the loan side.
I think it's pretty similar, Sean. Under TIFIA, and you're talking to roads, so it would be. Utility relocation is an eligible project cost. But I don't know that utility placement necessarily would be. But let's say you've got a $50 million project and $3 million of it is the utility placement. We would just reduce the eligible project cost by that amount and can lend, the TIFIA percentage to the remainder. So so you can utilize, other sources of funding for the parts that aren't eligible under our grant programs.
Thank you. Just putting in another reminder, if you have a question, a live question that you'd like to ask one of our presenters today, feel free to raise your hand or submit it on the chat feature. Pulling again from the pre-submitted questions, kind of on the same wavelength of the previous question, but is there funding for bridge widening and bikeway paths projects? Is that any different? I'm learning here too, guys. You guys enlighten me.
Absolutely. So, such as our build grant program would be eligible for bridge widening, as well as the infra grant program is as well. And under the build program, that's for multimodal transportation projects. You would be able to do a bike lane expansion project there, or a complete streets design type of project. As well as some of our other grants could be coupled with that, say, like with FTA's bus and bus facility, you could actually do the stop and dedicated transit lanes for funding there, which could incorporate more of a complete streets type of model where you separate the cars from the bikes, from the transit systems, and the pedestrians to make sure that you're promoting safety. So there definitely are a couple of different avenues there. I guess it just depends on, what exactly you're going after. And we did have a competitive bridge program as well. But I know that that's been talked up on the Hill, and I don't know if you've heard anything about that program.
Yeah, there is certainly a recognition that bridges are such an expensive infrastructure item and often more expensive than a community can actually pay for. So Congress has a recognition of that. There was some bridge funding in the appropriations bill and also in the House and Senate versions of the surface transportation bill, but as none of those are yet in law, so we don't have an existing pot of money, unfortunately, to draw from.
And I will say from the credit side that bike paths and bridge widening specifically are eligible costs. And one of the things that we've done a number of times is actually bundled a number of bridges into a single loan as a single project. And sort of like that Build It Now example I gave, you know, that can also be a single contract, so you can get a lot of economies of scale. We've done that a couple of times with great success.
Thank you for that. The next question we have here is that when are the next round of build and infra grants going to be announced? Do you guys have a timeline available on the website? Do you guys know where you head? Can you guys give us an idea?
It's all Erica, it's all dependent on you. No, it's all dependent on Congress putting together their appropriations for next year. Once the bill has passed both the House and the Senate, then it will have a requirement of us and timelines and all that kind of thing. But until that happens, we don't have yet a next round, unfortunately.
Pulling from information from the bus and bus facilities grant, one of the questions submitted is, are there grants for school bus replacement? Does that encompass school buses?
Unfortunately, it does not cover school buses. That is a local cost under the jurisdiction of these programs. However, I will say that there are several fixed routes that children do use for school, but is also routes for public transportation as well. Some of those could be eligible. It's a bit of a gray area and we'd be happy to work with you, but the specific funding of school buses are not an eligible cost under any of the programs that we have at the Federal Transit Administration.
Thank you. Looks like we're coming right up to the time of our program. Calling again for any additional questions from participants on the webinar as well. I'm checking the chat feature.
While everybody is thinking hard one last time, Erica, I'll make sure to circulate our contact information for you so you can pass it along to everybody on the call, as well as some links that Roger had provided to the Build America Bureau's website. And I'll provide the links to the applicant toolkit as well, which is a great resource for everyone.
I don't see any more questions coming through in that case. So I want to thank you, Roger, Sean, and thank you so much for your time and for your efforts in making time for us. So thank you for putting this information together for us. I really appreciate it. If anybody has any questions in regards to Department of Transportation grants or any programs that they have available, feel free to contact us. I will circulate their contact information, and as well, I'm going to input a shameless plug for our office as well. If any of you decide to apply for any of their grants or programs that they have available, please feel free to contact our office and specifically myself, or a letter of support from our Congressman Gil Cisneros, of course, and we're more than happy to work together to make sure that our community, our district, has the best available, programs available to make sure that we move our community forward. So thank you, everyone.
Erica, you did a fabulous job.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you to everyone. So
Thank
it was
you
a
for
team
having us.
effort. Sure.
Thanks so much, Erica. Take care, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.